Hey everyone, welcome to Sidetrack Adventures. This is Steve. Right now I'm on Old Highway 80 in the town of Arlington, and today we're going to visit one of the most mysterious ghost towns in Arizona. A place where someone, or someones unknown, has turned into a rock art canvas. To get there, we'll need to cross the Sonoran Desert and the Gila Mountains on the remote Agua Caliente Road. So let's head out and see what there is to see on the way to the mysterious ghost town of Sundad. Starting in Arlington, we're going to head about 30 miles west through the desert on Agua Caliente Road. Along the way, we'll be passing through no towns, or even any place where a town ever was. Though I hear the road is in great condition and passable by nearly any car. We won't be going as far as the town of Agua Caliente today, but that town is the reason this road is here. Agua Caliente was named in 1774 by Spanish missionaries, and in the late 1800s, a resort was built there to take advantage of the hot springs. Often when we go out into these remote places, we'll get questions about who controls the land. Well, today we'll be crossing land that's administered by the Bureau of Land Management. The resort at Agua Caliente was pretty popular for a time, and visitors would come from all over the world. It's even rumored that President Franklin Roosevelt visited. Most visitors would come from the Phoenix or Prescott area, and this is the road they'd take to get there. Those early travelers were rewarded with some amazing desert views. Luckily, we still get them today. Eventually, the hot springs dried up, and the resort closed in the 1950s, leaving only this road through the desert. We just came across something pretty interesting here. The old Southern Pacific Railroad line through this area is no longer in use. They stopped using it after an Amtrak train was intentionally derailed west of here in 1995. I actually just did a video on that, which I'll link in the description. After the derailment, they just decided to abandon the whole line. So they've been using it to store old rail cars, and there are a lot of them. These rail cars go on for miles. Luckily, they left a gap so we can get through. There has been talk about reopening this track in the future, but further to the west there are places where it's been completely washed out, so some major work would need to be done. Because this track has been closed, Phoenix, which is the 5th largest city in the United States, hasn't had passenger rail service in almost 30 years. The reason we're driving out here today is because off of this road there was a place called Sundad that no one seems to know much information about, and the information that is out there, who knows how true it is. After I first saw this town on Cactus Atlas, I have been fascinated by it, and have tried to find out as much information as I could. I just noticed something on the side of the road, so I had to stop so we could see what this is. It looks like we found a survey marker. It says not to disturb, so we'll be quiet. Let's see what the elevation is here. Elevation 999 feet. Just 1 foot short of 1,000. And this is where we are, about halfway to Sundad. There have been some rather impressive saguaros along the road so far. Based on its height, this one's probably at least 150 years old. Getting back to Sundad, its story is something of a mystery. What was it named after? Who settled it? Why? No one seems to know these answers. It's not even listed in the Arizona Place Names book. The history we do know is pretty colorful, though. Now we're coming up on 4th of July Butte. The mountain got its name because a group had a 4th of July picnic near here in the 1890s. So I guess technically the mountain is named after the picnic and not Independence Day. Here's a closer look at 4th of July Butte. There's also a 4th of July wash nearby, so that must have been one heck of a picnic. Looking back at the way we've come, you can see just how empty it is. If you love desert scenery, this so far has been a great drive. And now we're going to head across the Gila Bend Mountains. Up to this point, the road has been in great condition, and I think most cars would easily handle it. There have been a few spots that could be trouble after rain, but still, one of the only cars we've seen out here aside from us has been a Honda Civic. We have only about 6 miles until we reach Sundad now. This drive must have been some adventure back in the early 1900s. Like now, there would have been nothing in between Arlington and Sundad but the desert. We've made it to the turnoff for Sundad, and we're already getting to see some of the rock art. It looks like we have an anchor here, because obviously when you think of the desert, you think of anchors. A few peace symbols. And here's a star. And right next to the road, it looks like the rocks spell out Sundad. So there's no way not to know when you get to the turnoff. I'm sure this will look pretty cool from above, so we'll have to get the drone up. But this is the turnoff to Sundad. Someone spent a lot of time doing this, but from what I've seen, this only scratches the surface. So let's head down the road a little bit further and visit Sundad. While the road up to this point has been in great condition, the turnoff to Sundad isn't quite as good, but fortunately it's less than a mile to get there. As we're getting closer, this road is really taking a turn for the worse. We're heading down into a wash right now. On second thought, I think I'm going to turn around and park. I've put my car through a lot of punishment lately, So we're just going to go ahead and walk the last 7/10 of a mile to the town site. If you do any search online about Sundad, you'll read that this was the planned site for a tuberculosis sanitarium in the 1920s, but with improving treatments by the 1940s, it closed down. The problem is, I haven't been able to find any historical source for any tuberculosis treatments out here. Like most small settlements in Arizona, the reason it was originally here seems to be mining. There have been a number of mining claims filed in the area, but it doesn't seem like they ever produced much. By the 1930s, a man named J.R. McDonald was promoting the place as Sundad Mineral Wells and was selling a mineral water that claimed to cure all sorts of ailments. We're looking for a fork in the road right now, but here's a spoon in the road. I'm not exactly sure what this means. I wasn't joking about looking for a fork in the road. This road actually loops around the town site. Getting back to the mineral water for a minute, they were also advertising Sundad as a place where you could get a home-cooked meal, bask in the sunshine, and take a hot water massage bath. The miracle water and resort were short-lived, however. When World War II started, it stopped most leisure travel. It looks like maybe some smaller rock art here, but I have no idea what this is. Sundad is written in the rocks again, and it looks like there's a memorial bench over here as well. It says something on it. Oh, there's also another small memorial rock. Nobody knows who did all this stuff in the rocks out here, and as we'll see, some of the stuff is pretty big. Here is some of the bigger art. We'll have to get a look at this from above in a minute. And there's some smaller ones over here on this side of the road. But I want to see what this thing is off in the distance. Another of Sundad's claims to fame is that supposedly near here is where the last wild camel in Arizona died. But details on that are just as scarce as nearly everything else about this place. When Lee and Velma Bailey moved into an old mining shack here in 1951, the place was already long abandoned. As the last resident of Sundad, Velma Bailey would later make the national news, but before that, Sundad would make the news for something else in 1953. And this definitely looks like it's left over from Sundad's mining days. Let's take a look inside. It's probably too cold out for snakes right now. In September 1953, two Air Force planes collided during an in-flight refueling operation. 9 crew members of the refueling tanker bailed out and parachuted into this desert, landing near Sundad. 35 planes searched the desert for the missing men, and they were located after about 20 hours. 2 of them had minor injuries, but that was one of the few times Sundad would make the news. Well, until 13 years later. There's a mine over here. I don't know where the tuberculosis story originated from. I mean, I doubt they had tuberculosis patients out here mining. There's evidence of mining all throughout the hills. It just makes much more sense than a tuberculosis sanitarium. I mean, there could have been mining and a tuberculosis sanitarium, but why would you want that so far from civilization, especially when there was plenty of tuberculosis treatment centers in Phoenix? And this mine has been pretty much filled in. It looks like there's another mine over here, and then something on top of the hill. On November 30th, 1966, Velma Bailey became the last resident of Sundad when her husband Lee died in their one-room mining shack home. The Baileys had no phone, and by this point Velma was crippled and couldn't drive, so for 6 days she stood guard over her husband's body, trying to keep the flies away. During the 6 days she was alone, she cut white cloth into strips and put them outside, hoping to get a message to any planes that flew by. And we can actually see down into this mine shaft. I believe they were mining for gold out here, but I'm not 100% certain on that. Getting back to Mrs. Bailey, finally after 6 days, a friend stopped by to visit and found her watching over her husband. The story made national news, but since then, nobody has lived in Sundad, at least not permanently. Based on the pipe, this was most likely where the water was stored for the settlement. I wonder if we'll be able to figure out where they were getting their mineral water from. My guess is it probably dried up around the same time as the springs at Agua Caliente. And right down here is where the settlement was. Speaking of water, it looks like we found part of the water storage. And it looks like something has turned this into a den. Luckily, whatever it is isn't home right now. It seems we found the town dump as well. Metal cans are always the last sign that something was ever here. Some of the rock art out here is pretty elaborate. Well, I don't know if elaborate is the right word, but this one is filled with glass in the middle, which gives it a pretty interesting look. It actually looks like a few of them are incorporating glass into the rock art. But here's a foundation for one of the buildings that used to be here. It appears that part of the chimney is still standing. Unfortunately, I don't know what any of these buildings were, or even how many people lived out here. This place was never big enough to have its own post office, though it did appear on old maps. I also haven't been able to find any historic photos of Sundad, so we don't know what it looked like in its heyday. If you're going to do this, especially out here in the desert, make sure you bring lots of sunscreen. Because nobody seems to know who built this place and why, or really much of any of the history of it at all, it's been called Arizona's most mysterious ghost town. But the mystery has continued, because who created all of this rock art? Someone, or someones, put a lot of time and effort into this. I read somewhere where someone speculated that hippies came out here in the late 60s, early 70s and did this, but my guess is that it's been a collective effort, and a number of visitors have added to it over the years. Once one person did something, later visitors joined in. To me at least, most of the designs look to be in too good of condition to be 50 years old. Someone decided to use tin cans instead of glass in this one. This looks to be water storage for one of the buildings that was out here. It looks like we may have another mystery on our hands. Right next to where it says Sundad here, there is an arrow that is just seemingly pointing out into the desert to nothing. But then when you take a closer look, there is a windsock across the wash. So I think what we're going to have to do is get the drone back up and see what's over there. So looking around, I don't think there's anything over here aside from the windsock. Unfortunately, it doesn't look like the arrow was pointing towards any treasure, though maybe the real treasure is the mystery. Someone tried to make a life out here, and it would be great to know the true history of this place, but a good mystery is always fun too. And by this place remaining somewhat a mystery, who knows, maybe someday in the future, like all good mysteries, the History Channel will come out here and claim that aliens made it. So that's our look at Agua Caliente Road and the mysterious ghost town of Sundad. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and we'll see you next week.